Hello and welcome to the talk show, and in today's episode I've been interviewing a Green Party councillor, Julie Tucker. So thank you very much for her for doing the interview. I started off by emailing the local Conservative, Labour, Brexit Party and Green Party parties, and only the Greens replied. So maybe that speaks volumes about the Green Party, or maybe it doesn't. But we've been talking about Brexit and the environment and all sorts of things like that, so I hope you enjoy it.
So, into a slightly more relaxed.
Yes, so Julie Tucker, thank you very much for coming
It's my pleasure.
doing the interview. So I'll start off with some questions that I thought of, and then I've got some other questions that other people want me to ask.
Okay.
So, in the Brecon and Radnorshire by-election, which happened quite recently, the Green Party, of course, did a pact with Lib Dems and Plaid Cymru and other Remain parties to try and make sure that a very Remain party got elected, and that worked. So do you think you'd like to see more of those sorts of pacts going on, even if it meant more Lib Dems being elected who supported austerity in the coalition? Do you think that's something that you want to see?
I am very pro-Remain, so obviously I would like to see a people's vote, really. However, I think it's got to be, any pacts need to be done very carefully, and I think probably it needs to be done by a central arrangement rather than each local branch making decisions. I think we need to have an agreement that that's what we're going to do and what grounds we're going to do it on, because obviously I think the Greens need to come out of it with a fair agreement as well. It can't just be one-sided for the Liberals, or even in Wales for Plaid or whatever. So I think, yes, in principle, yes, but I think it needs to be done very carefully.
Yes, make sure that it's fair, yes, for both sides. So I think that answers that question quite nicely. I'll move on to the next one. So in the European elections, the Green Party said quite clearly that they wanted to stop Brexit and climate change. Do you think there's one that the Green Party should focus on more, one that's more important for the Green Party out of those two?
Well, ultimately the most important thing is climate change. Brexit, to some extent, is a sideshow that's been created. However, quite a bit of what we need to do in terms of stopping climate change needs to be done internationally. So that is one of the main reasons that I am so pro-Remain, because we need to be working with the rest of Europe and the rest of the world to reduce climate change, carbon emissions, as much as we can internationally. There's only so much we can do nationally, so that's my reason.
So if you're in the EU, then so people think you can get more done to solve that.
That's right. I mean, if you look at what has happened in terms of the environment generally, Europe has been very proactive, whereas our government is not so proactive. So that's another reason generally for supporting Brexit. For not supporting Brexit, I should say. For not supporting Brexit, because the environment has been so degraded, not just in terms of carbon emissions, but in terms of nature depletion. I mean, we're in the 6th mass extinction, so there's so much to do, and we need to do it as groups.
Yeah, and so being part of the EU, you think the UK, even with Conservative governments, can do more?
Yes, because the EU can, I mean, what we're not talking about is, people keep talking about how Europe is imposing things on Britain, but we have a say in whatever is decided. We're part of that group, so we can input as well. So it's not being done unto us, but
Yeah.
we're just working with others. But then what is decided does affect the country.
Yeah.
So yes, so even if it was a Conservative government, we could make a difference.
Okay, great. So recently there's been a lot of talk about a general election with with things like no confidence vote or whatever. Would you rather see a general election or a second referendum?
A second referendum, I think. I would rather see a second referendum. I'm doubtful. I would be doubtful about a general election simply because Boris Johnson has only just become Prime Minister and he's gone around making all these promises which I suspect he's unlikely to keep, but it all sounds very good. And so lots of people are going to be thinking there's a brave new world coming. So maybe a general election is not a good idea at this point in time, but I think a second referendum would be a step in the right direction.
Okay. And so what do you think we should do if it went leave again? Even more leave? Just...
Well, I think one of the things... Well, the whole initial referendum was a bit of a mess because it was only created by David Cameron to save his own party. It wasn't really for any other reason. And I think what should have been done in the first place was there should have been a percentage beyond which you had to reach to say that we would leave. And I think if we were doing a second referendum, I think we would want something more than a small majority, one way or the other really, because otherwise I think we're just going to be back at square one, and people are going to be very bitter on either side. If it reversed and we had 52% to remain and 48% to leave, we would be back to square one.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be a percentage figure put on that says either we leave or we stay. And I think there needs to be a lot more questions rather than do we leave or do we stay.
Okay.
Do you accept this deal? Or what deal do you want? Or some, lots of other questions that might make things a bit better.
Yeah. And so I suppose then it gets very difficult though if you're going to set that percentage, and if it doesn't meet that percentage, then what do you do?
Yes. Which is why I'm sort of slightly backtracking as I'm talking and saying maybe there should be, the question should be very carefully thought out as well. So it shouldn't just be a straightforward yes or no. There should be various things laid out. So what are the options? Should we stay? Should we leave with this agreement? Should we stay with this agreement? Or, various... Because there's been lots of discussions over the last 2 years as to what we could do.
Though only one withdrawal agreement has ever been negotiated, though.
Yes.
Yeah, so...
Yes.
Yeah. So it would be quite hard to put more options than that on, because if you said it would remain in our current position, would have Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, or to have leave without a deal, or leave with a free trade agreement, we haven't negotiated that yet.
Yes. Yeah.
So
and I'm wondering, because when a few months ago, during the European elections, we had a West Midlands Green candidate who was elected, and she came and spoke to us recently and said that the European Union is very keen, goodness knows why, to keep us there. after all the trouble we caused, but nonetheless they are, and they would really like to help us as much as they can. I'm just thinking, on my feet, I don't know whether this would work, but if we were to say to the negotiators, we want to have a second referendum, we would like to put various options, what might you be willing to agree to? And I'm sure there would be things, they're not going to get rid of the backstop.
Yeah.
That's one thing they're not going to, and I don't care who says what, they're not going to do it. I can't believe that they would. But there may be some things that they might be willing to, I mean, people have been talking about different trade agreements, haven't they? Would there be trade agreements that they would agree to? And I'm just wondering if there would be more leeway in that way. Not if they knew there was going to be another referendum rather than just Parliament slugging it out between themselves.
Yeah. I suppose if we did say we're going to have a second referendum, what are you going to offer us to put on that ballot paper? I suppose they might try and make leaving the EU look as bad as possible and offer, actually, not offer that much at all.
But they might. So it might end up, might work in our favour in actual fact, because I do think a lot of people would be worried about a no-deal Brexit. I'm certainly worried about a no-deal Brexit. And I think just an ordinary man in the street that might have voted to leave, thinking it was just easy peasy, now knowing what the possibilities are, might be more inclined to vote to stay. So, and again, that might work in Remain's favour.
Yeah, so much we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I suppose that brings me on to my next question then. So, is your council preparing for no deal at all? Is there any preparations in place if that were to happen?
I think there's some things going on in the background. I think officers are doing certain things, but I think there's a certain amount of, because people have not been sure until really the last few weeks as to how keen government is to go for a no deal. I think that now they know Boris Johnson's there and he doesn't really care. I think then things are moving a little bit now, but yes, there are some things being prepared. Yes.
Do you think that would be enough, though, to try and?
Well, I think with all of these things, what usually happens is it's the unexpected, isn't it, that throws up the problems, and however much you prepare, there's going to be things that we have not foreseen.
Yeah. Okay, now I have some requested questions from other people. So, today there was, I think, a report released by the UN saying that if we want to try and tackle climate change, we're going to need to reduce our meat consumption. And somebody was wondering what your views on eating meat are.
Right. Well, I don't eat meat. I'm not a meat eater. I've been a vegetarian for many years, but I am a vegetarian, so I do eat dairy products. And I know there's an awful lot of CO2 emissions caused by livestock. I do believe, however, that it is worse in intensive farming. That's what I've been told by organic farmers, that is what happens. So I think it's partly, if you're going to eat meat, and I don't think we can force people not to eat meat. I think we discourage them and encourage them to eat less. But I think if you can afford to, then if you can buy organic, that's better. Because the thing is, if you think about pastures that are used by livestock, that grass is holding in an awful lot of carbon emission. Now, if we decide that suddenly we're not going to eat any more meat, so we plough all that up, we're releasing an awful lot of carbon. So I think it's like all things, it's never as simple as, oh, let's do that and it'll all be all right.
Yeah.
We've got to do a lot of different things. And I think, yes, we do need to reduce our reliance on meat. But I think we also need to think about how our agriculture is done as well. Intensive farming is not good. That creates the worst. So I think we need to try and deal with that first and encourage people to eat less meat.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what do you think, and what can councillors do and local councillors do to try and tackle the climate emergency? What's Evesham Council doing at the moment?
Right. Well, we have a town plan which includes an area on environment, and we are trying to reduce our emissions. We haven't declared a climate emergency, I have to say, but in a way, to me, that doesn't matter. What matters is, are you doing something? So if you're doing a lot, then that's great. So earlier this year, we had a big meeting. We pulled in a lot of local people, asked them if they would be interested in creating groups that would work on different areas of the environment. So we've got 6 groups up and running. We're going to get one more group up and running, which we weren't able to do at the time, that are going to be looking at ways of reducing our impact on carbon emissions. So buildings we're talking about energy, obviously, waste and recycling, all of those areas we're trying to look at to bring down the emissions locally.
And do you think councils should be given more powers to do things like that? Do you think that would help?
I do think so. I think local democracy is very important, because I think if you can encourage local people to do things, I think more can be done. It's a bit like looking at these grassroots groups like Extinction Rebellion. Look how they've managed to get lots of people involved in things because they feel that they're doing something. And I think if local people think they can do something, I think it makes a difference. So yes, is the short answer.
Now, you've mentioned Extinction Rebellion. So, do you think people like Extinction Rebellion are helping to tackle climate change with things like blocking roads and those sorts of protests? Do you think they're making a positive difference?
I can see why they're doing it. When we were talking before we were properly set up, and I said to you, I joined the Green, well, it wasn't called the Green Party then, it was called the Ecology Party when I joined in 1980. And before that I'd been in Friends of the Earth. And we have worked for the last nearly 40 years, and we haven't managed to achieve an awful lot. So I can see why Extinction Rebellion are thinking we've got to wake people up. If you think about Greta Thunberg, we've got 12 years, well less than that now, 11 years, to try and hold back the temperature that we're creating, global warming. That's not a lot of time to do the sorts of things that we need to do. And if we've spent 40 years and not achieved much, we need to do something radical. So I can see why Extinction Rebellion are doing that. I think they're trying their best not to create too much disruption, but what they would, and I've read in various places, they would say is, think of what the disruption is going to be if we don't do anything. If you see look what happened at Whaley Bridge in the last few days, and that could be happening anywhere.
Yeah. So, and I suppose, I think one of the things that people don't like about them is them getting stuck in traffic. And do you think that makes more sort of negative feelings towards them than it does positive? Is that?
Well, I'm sure there's going to be some negative feeling. I don't think. I don't think with protest you're ever going to have everybody saying, whoa, that's great. But whenever I've seen it reported on national TV, there's also been a lot of people who've said, I see what they're doing, I agree. And maybe even some of these people who at the time are really angry because they've got to get somewhere, maybe if they think about it, it makes them stop and think. And do they even need to be in their car, perhaps? So I'm sure there's going to be some negative impact, but I still think I wouldn't condemn them, because I think what they're doing is there's a long tradition of that sort of protest that is important to do.
Yeah. Now, we've talked a lot about climate change. What do you think the most effective way of dealing with it is?
Well, individuals can do so much. There's things you can do to your own way of life, and that's great. And if we all did something, that would help. But we do need governments to start tackling things. We're building a third runway at Heathrow, for example. That's not good news, really, is it, for the environment? Fracking is also not good news. So I think there's things that national governments could do, and then obviously, like we said right at the beginning when we were talking about the EU, there's things internationally that we need to not just make agreements like the Paris agreements and various other ones. We need to act on them as well. We could do with the US doing something. We won't go along that road. Having said that, a lot of their states are still working very hard to reduce it. They just haven't got that central support that they really should have. There's no place for climate denial. There's just no place for it. So I think that, to answer your question, I don't think there's any one thing. I think there's a whole raft of things we need to do. We might have been able to do, going back, if we'd done something 30 years ago, we could have done all of this very gradually. But we're now in a bit of an emergency situation. So.
Now, some people would say that the UK on our own can reduce our emissions, and that's great. But we account for hardly any of the global emissions. If we want to really make a big difference, then you need to get China and India and Russia and the US to try and reduce their global emissions. So there's not much point in us doing it. No.
Well, I think that's a bit of a cop-out, isn't it, really? If you say, well, they're all creating emissions, so there's no point in us doing anything, then nothing will change. I think historically we've got a big burden on our shoulders because we started all of this, didn't we? Let's be honest. So I think we could lead by example. That would be one thing. I think that would be great to be able to say, okay, we might have started the Industrial Revolution, but we're actually going to take this and lead on reducing emissions. I think if we're looking at somewhere like India, for example, we are very well off, and I think for us to say, well, you need to be reducing your emissions, well, we've got so much. I think that's a bit cheeky, really. I think it's known as hypocrisy. So I wouldn't like to go there. And I think the other thing we need to think about is that a lot of the global south are the areas that are being hit already by climate change, floods, tornadoes, all sorts of things. I mean, there are already quite a lot of climate refugees. So I don't think that's really a reason for not doing anything. It'd be great if Russia and America and China. Although I think China are actually planting loads of trees, absolutely loads. I think we're talking millions of trees.
Yes.
So it's a start.
Yeah. Long way to go, but yeah. Now, what do you think the Green Party can do to try and get more people to support it, more people to vote for?
I think we need to just keep reminding people of what the situation is. We are, I don't know how to say it because I think it's horrible for young people, but we've put you all in a terrible situation, really. And I think that the sooner we get them to try and rectify that so that things are better for you when you're older, when you're adults. So I think we just need to keep hammering home to people, and I think that's what isn't being done by the media still. I still don't see a lot of information, a lot of anything being said about climate change in the media. I mean, there was all of this about Whaley Bridge and other things, and I think once I heard a mention of climate change, and I thought, you know, this isn't normal, is it, for Britain at this time of year to be getting rain like that? It's because our weather patterns are changing because of climate change. And I think people need to keep being reminded so that they start to want to act.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry to be so depressing.
Well, thank you very much for coming and doing it, giving up your time.
That's a pleasure, that's a pleasure. And I don't want to end on a really desperate note, so I would say one of my big things at the moment is I'm really pleased to see lots of young people getting involved, getting more politically active, even young people like yourself. It's great, so there we are. I think there's hope for the world.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.